We will be starting the webinar in a couple of minutes. We're seeing many people joining during these last couple of minutes. So give a couple of minutes for more people to join, and then we'll kick off. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this 5th seminar organized by PwC, talking about COVID-19 and the impact it has had on business. Good to see quite a number of names that are familiar and some that are new. Basically, the objective of the seminar today is to focus on the impact that the current situation has had on cybersecurity what we've seen our clients in Malta and abroad have been facing, the challenges, and some tips and ideas on how to deal with the current situation and with the changing environment that it has brought with it. Next slide, please. Okay, to start off, to introduce the team, I'm George Salmut. Some of you may already know me. I'd like to introduce two members of our cybersecurity team, Kirsten Cremona and John Napier, who will be helping during this session and presenting some parts of it. The session is being recorded and it will be shared with you after the end. And we will also be taking questions at the end of the session, but feel free to submit a question during the session as it crops up. Please use the chat. The indicator is on the top right of your screen. Just write the question there, and we will be dealing with all the questions at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Okay, as regards the agenda, basically, as I said, we're looking at the impact that COVID-19 has had on cybersecurity. We've seen a number of situations, some coming from the outside, so essentially the threat landscape, what has been going on, and the attacks and potential attacks that we have been seeing growing during the last weeks, as well as on the inside. So we've all had to change the way we're working. Many of you have part of the organization, or a large part of the organization, working remotely. And this has changed also the threats and the perhaps controls weaknesses, opened up certain situations which we didn't have normally. And we're also going to see and talk about how to ensure that the infrastructure, the operations, the IT, as well as the good practices on cybersecurity can be applied even in these stressful and perhaps chaotic times that we've had to face. In the end, we also talk about end users, a very important aspect, and one of the big changes, if you like, that we've seen that this epidemic has brought about, the social distancing and the isolation and working from home, and a lot of people working through connectivity, using perhaps tools and devices which weren't familiar before this started. Some, of course, have been working remotely for many years, and those are familiar, but we've seen a surge in the number of people and number of organizations that have opened up to remote working more recently, and essentially what this brings about and how to deal with it from a cybersecurity point of view. Next slide. Okay, as I said, if you have a question, use the chat panel on the right. Please feel free. We have time reserved at the end of the presentation to field questions and discuss and have a more interactive part of the experience. Okay, next slide. Basically, the situation, the COVID-19, if you look back, I think around about Christmas or the New Year, nobody could have predicted the outbreak and how life and business will change in a very, very short time. In fact, one of the aspects that we've had to deal with, we, as in I'm talking about people responsible for IT, people responsible for IT security, those in charge of compliance, audit, and this sector, essentially suddenly, in a very short time, needed to react to a situation that is very much like a crisis. Even though, thankfully, in Malta, the health impact has not been spreading like wildfire as we've seen in other countries, from a business point of view and from an operational point of view, there was a big impact. And as in any situation where one is dealing with a crisis, an incident, basically there's a lot of things that start happening at the same time, and people responsible are having to deal with different facets at the same time. And this raises problems, challenges, certainly, of keeping track of everything and dealing and not forgetting things that matter. In fact, one of the aspects is that the cybersecurity landscape outside the organizations has changed. In fact, unfortunately, we're seeing so many cases of people, wrongdoers, taking the opportunity and launching attacks and trying to infiltrate and hack and also commit fraud in a situation which perhaps is new and weakens the defenses that are normally seen. So the outside world has changed from a security point of view. And also the shift to remote working has had a very significant impact. Many organizations have introduced new technology, opened up new facilities, started using online services which weren't introduced previously. And so a lot of new things. And as you know, when anything is new, there are teething troubles, there may be issues which are not noticed during the implementation and then surface later. So we have an issue from a cybersecurity point of view to keep track and make sure that there is sufficient defenses in an environment, a situation, as I said at the beginning, where we are in a crisis. We're not calm and working diligently and calmly to implement something new. No, there's people and business leaders breathing down our back and hurry up and set this up and roll it out, etc. So potential for cutting corners and doing things not in the standard way increase. All of this, and we are not isolated. We are also facing challenges from suppliers. Now, it may be the business suppliers, but it also has an impact on IT suppliers. We all depend on services such as connectivity. Hardware breaks down. We may need more laptops. And the speed at which the COVID rolled out and hit businesses was such a short time frame that many normal supply chains were caught out unawares or unprepared. And this has added to the challenges that we've been facing. Now, I'm going to hand over to Kirsten to start the next session, where we're going to look at the threat landscape and how it has changed in the epidemic. Kirsten?
Thank you, George. Afternoon, everybody. So yes, as cybersecurity professionals ourselves, we're always interested in understanding this evolving threat landscape, how it evolves during certain events. You may remember a few years ago during the WannaCry and NotPetya ransomware events, which had crippled IT systems in organizations where perhaps the security risks were not at the top of the agenda, and things like patch management was neglected. You may remember that it was a distressing time. However, the repercussions from the coronavirus will hit, and unfortunately is hitting every organization, I would say, no matter how resilient these companies think they are. Possibly no single event to date has changed the threat landscape more than the consequences of this pandemic. Let's explore this phenomenon. So, cyber criminals and threat actors, like any other criminals, will always try to take advantage of such opportunities. They are clever, and they will try to make more successful attacks. What is this opportunity that threat actors are currently seizing? It is the desire of human beings for information, first and foremost, and the desire for safety and support, especially during this health crisis. There are organized crime groups that are exploiting such fear, such uncertainty and doubt, and trying to take advantage of it by targeting individuals and businesses in a variety of ways, as we will explore shortly. We have even seen a surge of attacks from various state-sponsored malicious actors, from China, North Korea, Russia, and so on and so forth. So everybody's trying to take advantage of this. Yes, in this threat landscape, people, us, we've become more susceptible to social engineering attacks. Mainly, we've seen through COVID-themed phishing emails, malicious websites, SMSs, so on and so forth. So attackers are basically reusing existing legitimate content, trying to lure people in divulging sensitive information, perhaps download a Trojanized malicious dropper, which when executed would fire off a ransomware, install a rootkit, backdoor, etc. They are not inventing anything new. I mean, we've seen this before. They are simply using new pressure points, which will obviously help them succeed in their malicious campaigns. We've also seen a sharp increase in the price of phishing kits by over 140%. So these are kits or tools which even a script kiddie can easily install and launch a fully fledged phishing campaign. This clearly shows there's large demand and there's a high success rate. Otherwise, people would not be pushing prices up. Other sources also point out around 250% increase in active phishing websites since the beginning of the year. That's quite a big number, as well as a spike in coronavirus-related domains being registered daily. So the bad guys are definitely keeping themselves busy during this lockdown period. The surge in cyber threats has also been fueled by the fact that organizations, as George mentioned, had to rapidly shift their resources to remotely accessible systems that have been possibly put together hastily to ensure the continuity of operations, possibly without ensuring and performing the necessary due care, having the necessary security configuration baselines, hardening, so on and so forth. There's also been reports by Interpol of cyber attacks against hospitals, for instance, holding critical medical equipment at ransom. Unfortunately, as if the hospitals don't already have enough on their plate trying to cope with a biological virus. There's also been reports that the World Health Organization itself has been made target of such attacks. So what does this malicious activity look like? There are a million examples. Of course, we've only put a few over here. There have been instances of WHO-themed informative websites and emails trying to trick users for downloading malware, or perhaps redirecting them to email services such as 365, G Suite, enticing them to enter credentials. I think the most famous, or you might have likely stumbled upon, is the Johns Hopkins. It's a University of Medicine. They have an interactive map that shows COVID-19 infection rate across the globe. And basically, attackers disguised it and packaged it in a malware. And they try to deliver keyloggers, banking Trojans, etc. to unsuspecting users. Of course, a curious user who would like to know how the outbreak is progressing will likely fall victim to that. So a few other examples, as shown in the slide. There's been CDC-themed scam websites, other COVID-themed mobile apps, Trojan apps. So you think it's a legitimate news portal related to the virus, to the pandemic, and it's actually doing something malicious behind the scenes. SMS-based phishing lures, or smishing, as it's called. There's also been reports of different or various file names associated with such malicious activity. So there's threat intelligence, which gathers file names. And here in the slide, we have a few examples. Of course, some of them are easily recognizable because you would see like COVID-19.executable.exe. That's immediately suspicious. However, there's also PDFs, Office document formats, which would have embedded links inside them, and eventually they would execute or point you to a malicious website and execute the malware the attacker intends. Okay, so despite the evolving threats we are constantly facing, we are still tasked with ensuring continuity of the business. I mean, we cannot freeze in our spots. We need to react to this. And that means supporting the business which is now remote, and supporting with adequate IT infrastructure. But of course, this provides its own set of challenges, as we will see. So in recent years, we have witnessed many businesses shifting from the traditional on-premises operation or model to a more decentralized and distributed one, connecting offices in different geolocations, for instance, through dedicated links and virtual private networks, and then facilitated by the advent of the cloud and the explosion of file sharing and collaboration tools. So now it's pretty easy for startup companies and even established companies, particularly those that operate within the technology industry, to move their operations in a distributed manner and reduce capital costs. Now, as a side effect of the coronavirus pandemic, we have been seeing businesses who are either accelerating the adoption of such model and reaping its benefits, while other organizations that are getting a taste of this distributed model, whether they like it or not. So they are, of course, facing numerous IT challenges which they were not prepared for. So let's see what these challenges are. So the first is a shift in priorities. Unfortunately, it's unavoidable. Companies would have different IT infrastructure and digital transformation projects in their pipeline, such as I don't know, moving an enterprise resource planning system to something more robust, something more up to date. Of course, they've been sidelined to implement technologies that help combat this specific scenario. So we've seen them implementing VPN technologies, deploying collaboration tools, chat and video conferencing, moving data on the cloud, mobile devices, deploying them to end users. I mean, many companies would not have the required resources to actually facilitate business in a remote setting. And all of this while trying to keep cybersecurity in the picture. However, as time progresses and business adapts to this reality, the outcomes and deliverables of such IT projects that have been sidelined will likely have to be revisited, and they have to check whether they will be equipped for this new business model. Businesses which lacked business continuity planning, or those businesses which lacked proper plans for business continuity, have surely felt the pressure of this onset. On the current situation, it is vital to react as fast as possible, to mitigate impacts, manage the risks, and to prepare the organization for further development of the pandemic and its scenarios. Business continuity management covers several things. There's infrastructure, there's cybersecurity, of course, the workforce itself, the business processes, operational communication risks, etc. So all of this with the aim of managing the organization, trying to face new challenges and risks, while at the same time ensuring the continuity of operations and production. So businesses which were found themselves unprepared for this are suffering quite badly. We also witness a shortage of available tools and devices. We've witnessed a large number of businesses trying to source such tools, trying to make remote working possible. local companies trying to get laptops, trying to purchase them or try to hire them, everything going out of stock. Mass adoption of video conferencing tools. I mean, if you take example of Zoom, video communication, which is the company behind the Zoom app, their stock price doubled since the start of the year. That shows how much its product was in demand. Of course, there's security implications as well with something like Zoom, as we will explore later. Lastly, the major risk or a collection of risks that I'd like to elaborate during the rest of this webinar is cybersecurity risk. Businesses had to move from a centralized workforce to a distributed one, and that, of course, doesn't come free. It comes with new security risk as a result of the quick adaptation, trying to ensure uninterrupted business operations, probably at the expense of proper security configurations, secure protocols, testing those systems and implementations, and understanding, like the Zoom app, the implications of new third-party tools. We cannot eliminate these new threats in whichever shape and form they present themselves. However, our job is to identify these risks and manage them, and ensuring that we are adhering to a proper cyber resilience program. On this very specific subject, my colleague John will elaborate further.
Hi, thank you, Kirsten. So now we're going to be looking at considerations and measures which organizations can take to actually improve their cybersecurity posture. Next slide, please. So the current situation and shift to remote working has meant that the security perimeter for organizations has been altered. Typically, organizations would have all of their information assets and devices sitting behind the organization firewall and gateway. This setup has been shaken up already with the advent of cloud service. However, now another radical change has occurred. We are now seeing that the security perimeter is shifting to the endpoint devices and ultimately the users themselves. It is important to know that one can no longer be confident in the security of these endpoints. An assumption must be taken that there is high probability that these endpoint devices will be targeted and possibly compromised. It is therefore encouraged that organizations adopt a zero trust position when it comes to these devices. Security measures to adopt with regards to endpoints include implementing endpoint and application security updates. So we've been seeing that vendors such as Microsoft are patching critical vulnerabilities within their operating systems and applications. And it is therefore very important to push and implement updates once they are made available. Also, ensure that all endpoints are running an updated antivirus and malware protection software. These are critical in limiting the damage from malicious exploits. Organizations must also try to limit the possibility of drive-by downloads occurring. Now, what are these? So these are basically the unintended download of computer software from the internet. Although these are less common nowadays, they still pose a risk. Therefore, patching browsers, mail clients, and applications such as Microsoft Office and Adobe Reader is important, as these are regularly used to open such downloads. Lastly, there are a few reasons to be running browser plugins such as Flash and Java nowadays. Disable them if you possibly can, as it's much safer and easier than trying to keep them updated. Therefore, once these recommendations have been put in place, it is highly advised that a review is performed in order to ensure that there are no gaps in the implemented endpoint security. And if there are any, the organization knows about them, documents them, and the risk is either accepted or mitigated. Another area of concern, as Kirsten mentioned in recent weeks, is the use of collaboration tools. These tools, such as video conferencing and file transfer applications, are now being used on a daily basis. Whilst offering very good functionality, such tools may not adhere to the required security standards that we may expect. We've been continuously hearing of reports of such tools, such as Zoom, having critical vulnerabilities. Just to put you into perspective, Zoom was found to have vulnerabilities which allowed individuals to enter a video conference call to which they were not invited to, and also, to make things worse, Zoom credentials were found to be posted on the dark web. And also this morning, we found that hackers are trying to sell new zero-day vulnerabilities on the dark web. So these are new vulnerabilities specifically affecting Zoom. It is therefore imperative that all collaborative tools are reviewed from a security and privacy perspective. An official list of approved tools for various functions should be drawn up and communicated to all employees and users. These need to be enforced. So the use of these tools must be enforced then. So users cannot go around using different tools. Why? Because they expose the organization to new risks. Next slide, please, Kirsten. Thank you. So we just spoke about endpoint security. However, we cannot not mention network security. So although the security perimeter has shifted, network security is still vital in protecting our organizations. Not having a proper network security posture might result in us getting exploitable gaps. This could allow a malicious attacker to gain access and traverse your network. A network security testing regime should be adopted to help identify network vulnerabilities. 3 main types of testing are usually adopted in this case. The first is external vulnerability testing. Here, a vulnerability scan is performed on the external network in order to identify gaps in the external network perimeter. This testing also mimics the scanning a malicious perpetrator would perform in order to better understand the network being targeted. The second is an internal vulnerability scan. Once again, a vulnerability scan is performed. However, in this case, it is launched from within the internal network. This is used to identify possible vulnerabilities an attacker may exploit once access is gained into the network. It is also very good to keep in mind that such vulnerabilities may be exploited by a malicious insider too. Last but not least is a penetration test. So what is this? Such a test includes vulnerability scanning. However, in this case, the detected vulnerabilities are actually exploited in order to determine the amount of damage which may be inflicted. As always, internal network resources may still be needed from time to time when working remotely. One needs to be cautious when providing access to the internal network to reduce the risk of unauthorized access. This caution is applied to safeguard network resources from employees who may inflict unintentional damage and to prevent potential malicious intruders from gaining access. Whenever granting access to network resources, it is important that you establish if an employee needs access to the internal network or just access to cloud-based services and email. Also, take into consideration whether the same level of access to sensitive data enjoyed on-site should be granted when the employee is off-site. So let's consider the scenario where access to the organization's internal network is needed. It is recommended that access should only be achieved from an organization-owned device. Why? Because such a device would abide by the organization specifications and the IT or security team have a level of control over such a device. Related to this topic, when working remotely, one must be aware that all traffic is flowing over public networks. We therefore recommend to always use a VPN to connect remote workers to your organization's internal network. This prevents man-in-the-middle attacks from remote locations. When implementing a VPN solution, considerations need to be made on whether to adopt a full VPN tunnel or a split VPN tunnel. With a full VPN tunnel, all traffic destined to the internet is routed through the VPN tunnel. This essentially places the device in the internal network with all the network security controls and filtering one would experience when working from within the office. While safer, this type of solution can often create a considerable bottleneck on bandwidth as all the traffic is automatically transmitted to the VPN server. This ultimately slows down the internet speeds and tasks and prevents users from accessing local devices such as printers, which are found, for example, within their home. On the other hand, a split VPN tunnel functions slightly differently. All local area requests are still routed and encrypted over VPN. However, traffic destined to sites on the internet do not go through the VPN server. This therefore reduces the load on the VPN server. The main drawback of this solution is that it also reduces one's ability to filter internet traffic and sites. This potentially exposes end users and their devices to malware from download sites and social media sites, which would usually be blocked. Next slide, please, Kirsten. Thank you. There are various security practices and measures that can be implemented to limit our exposure to cyber attacks. And these can include simple measures such as the implementation and enforcement of a strong password policy. It is important to enforce passwords on boot, so when a device is switched on. Set inactivity timeout, so after a short period of time, for example, 2 minutes or 3 minutes, the user is logged out. And also, we should try ban and limit sticky notes with passwords on them or writing our passwords in diary. The latter might require that organizations invest in an awareness campaign and then also in password managers. There are various which can be found online. Another effective measure is the implementation of multi-factor authentication, or MFA. So MFA helps ensure that access, whether to cloud-based services or full network access, is gained by authorized users only. This means that authentication is achieved through something one knows, which is their username and password as usual, and something one has, which is the MFA code. Wherever possible, it is advised that an app-based system or physical hardware token is used to generate these one-time codes. Now we know that since there may be time pressure to deploy such a solution, it is good to know that app-based solutions remove the need to procure and distribute hardware. Also, app-based systems provide you greater security than one-time passwords via SMS. This is especially if the device used to receive the codes is not an organization-managed device and could therefore be subject to attacks such as a SIM swap attack. Several security measures may be directly implemented on end-user devices. This includes the implementation of full disk encryption on all portable devices and laptops. So this means that upon shutdown, the hard disk is encrypted. So this helps ensure that even if the device falls into the wrong hands, the organization's data is not accessible. Additionally, you may want to control the use of external devices such as USB storage and peripheral devices. Why? These are one of the main delivery methods for social engineering attacks and malware. So you'd have a USB stick with malware on it. As soon as you plug it in, you won't realize, but it would have delivered a payload. As always, it is important that organizations help enforce good practice, such as logging out of a device when it is not in use, both at home and in public areas. This can help prevent an accidental email being sent if, for example, a kid gets hold of the device. And in the case of working in a public area, it also limits the opportunity for someone to gain access to the machine whilst it is unattended. One should always place a great deal of consideration on cybersecurity awareness. As we already mentioned, there are numerous COVID-19 scams in circulation. When employees are relocated out of the workplace and are placed, for example, in a more casual atmosphere such as home, they may consider clicking on links, as there are no colleagues around them who may judge them or even realize. Now, cybersecurity awareness and training is typically an annual requirement. However, we strongly advise that you run a refresher campaign and also provide employees with regular cybersecurity updates. So this leads us on to the next slide, Kirsten. Yes, so we're going to discuss phishing. Phishing is the most common attack vector that we see nowadays, especially with COVID, the current situation with COVID-19. The vast majority of social engineering attacks make use of this at some stage. Phishing campaigns may be aimed at luring victims or your employees into providing information such as credentials, luring them to perform actions such as authorizing payments, and also users may unknowingly download malware such as ransomware. It is therefore in the interest of all organizations to beef up their phishing defenses. The first line of defense should always be a robust and properly configured email platform and filter. This will help block emails containing malicious attachments and links. Although effective, we must not solely rely on such a measure. Organizations could also implement several quick wins when it comes to phishing protection. This is, for example, placing a banner on all emails originating from outside the organization. So all emails which are not from within would have a banner at the top notifying the user that it is from an external person. This will help employees realize that something may be wrong, especially if the domain being used by the attacker is very similar to the one owned by your organization. It is also very important to prevent the automatic running of macros on Microsoft Office, for example. So as Kirsten mentioned, the macros are used to may contain malicious software and code. If employees click on such a document and run the macros, malware may be installed onto their device. Therefore, Microsoft Office should always be configured to actually prompt users to accept to run macros. Why? Because if they are not expecting a macro, this might alert them that something is not quite right. We also strongly advise that you try to gain a clear understanding of your susceptibility to phishing attacks. How can this be achieved? So one can run regular phishing and simulation campaigns within your organization. This can be tailored to mimic attacks, attempting to deliver malicious payloads in attachments, or attempting to harvest credentials, such as username and passwords. Such emails can be designed to mimic current lures, such as those taking advantage of the current COVID-19 pandemic, or they can be designed in accordance to phishing emails which you are currently seeing within your organization. The data from such campaigns can then help you understand the current situation when it comes to phishing awareness, and will also help guide you on designing future awareness campaign and training. That is all from my end.
Thank you, John. So yeah, we've been talking about this security parameter, and with this new onset, it has become quite blurred. Now we have end users playing a more pivotal role, more than ever, within the security chain. So it only takes one person, like we were saying, to fall victim of a phishing email, for instance. So as security professionals or managers within our businesses, we need to help our users in education and security awareness. So what are the things that as a user you would expect, as a user you would need to follow rather than expect, and the organization should expect these things from the end user, starting from the first one. We have clear and binding guidelines on how to stay secure. So employees on their own, they are not probably, they might not be tech savvy, they might not be security conscious. We need to guide them. We need to establish some document, communication, helping them understand how to be secure while working remotely. So it's not just about staying safe indoors, avoiding the coronavirus. It's also very important to stay secure while working in this remote environment. We need to cover topics such as social engineering, how to manage physical and digital business data. Perhaps, I believe John mentioned that previously, a list of tools that are permissible, especially the cloud-based ones, because they might be using tools which are not approved by our company. So, but we need to inform them about them. We may also have a guideline on what type of sites can they visit with their work machines, especially now that the endpoints are sitting behind their home router instead of the corporate firewall. So if you're not doing endpoint URL filtering, people can access web content which is usually blocked within the office. So good security should not be complex, and making use of even basic standard tools is better than nothing. So case in point, host-based firewalls such as the Windows firewall should be enabled and configured properly, because now they don't have a proper firewall in front of their endpoint. You will be relying on a host-based firewall. So taking the example of Windows Firewall, of course, nowadays anti-malware solutions come with a variety of firewall protection. We are spoiled for choice, really. On the same line, endpoint protection is key. It's crucial within a distributed workforce because we need to enable the secure management of data, both at rest and in transfer, have the necessary data loss prevention software. We have to monitor the flow of data, tracking any leakages that might happen, and advanced malware protection. Again, as I said, anti-malware solutions nowadays have a myriad of tools. They're not just against protecting against viruses, really. They're protecting against different type of exploits and malware. Very important is the fact that confidentiality should also be maintained in a home environment by the end user. We naturally would trust our household relatives and may think it's okay to speak about sensitive information in common areas. However, we believe we should always abide by the principle of the need to know basis. So never underestimate the importance of the data. We may perhaps discussing over a call. So it's very important because, I mean, most of the breaches that we see usually are a result of accidental data leakage rather than intentional. Okay, few other tips. Yes, we need to protect confidential information by keeping devices private and the data secure from unauthorized viewing. We need to use company-approved secure file transfer portals, especially for highly confidential data, perhaps client data. Accidental data leakages can inflict a great deal of damage. So such occurrences can unfortunately lead to hefty regulatory fines, loss of trust, reputational damage. It's very important that users in this situation take special care when handling this data outside the office. Perhaps you would want to implement a policy where you don't allow physical copies of such data to better protect your organization. Yes, so mobile devices, of course, we've moved to everything mobile. So we have using both laptops, perhaps tablets, or smartphones. We need to make sure that there's some level of security protecting them. So a PIN, passwords, using biometrics, perhaps basic security apps installed even on mobile devices. For instance, mobile application or device management can help you segregate personal and organizational data on a smartphone. If you have your employees who are currently using smartphones on a regular basis to perform work, perhaps it's something that you want to consider. It's also important to follow basic security practices like you are in the office, like locking your screen, which should not be neglected, especially if you work in a busy area of your household, you have children. Again, think of accidental data leakages in a household environment rather than intentional. Using end-to-end encryption where possible, so that if data is captured in transit, malicious actors won't be able to read it because only the sender and the recipient would have the key to actually read that data. Lastly, vigilance. This means being prudent. Why? Because social engineers are our biggest threat. We have to be cautious all the time when opening and reading emails, receiving calls, SMSs, etc. So currently we have our guards maybe a bit lowered, especially with all that's happening around us. Security may not be at the top of our mind, but and of course this what we said in the beginning. This is an opportunity for attackers currently because everyone is concerned about our health, and rightly so. But it is during these times that we lower our guard and basically fall victim of a scam or a phishing email. Even a security professional can fall victim of such attack. So that's it from my end. I will hand over to George for the concluding remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Kirsten. Yes, basically, as we've just heard from John and Kirsten, there's a lot of aspects to be wary of. And one aspect that needs to be kept in mind is that we are in a situation where many businesses are facing challenges from a commercial point of view. You know, business has decreased, some very significant decreases, and therefore a cost-cutting mentality or strategy is something which is very common. Now, in a situation like this, one cannot imagine that we're going to splash out and justify big investments in new security technology. In fact, the opposite is true. One would expect that if asked to implement new solutions, etc., many IT managers and operators will look to find a potentially open source or freeware solution to make do. One thing that we need to keep in mind in this context is that when this is over, and hopefully it won't be too long when this is over and people stop needing to be working remotely and working from home, it's unlikely that we will go back to normality and the previous way of working. Now that so many people have been immersed in working remotely, the concept and the commonality of working remotely, I'm sure will be much more than prior to the COVID-19 outbreak. So we need to also take into consideration that beyond the lockdown, shall we say, that we are facing, the technologies that we have rolled out in the last few weeks, almost in an emergency mode, are likely to last longer. Think of the typical case. Okay, we'll take a shortcut temporarily and then we'll fix it later. Of course, it never gets fixed. So be aware of any hasty or short-term measures that were put in place that were intended to work for a couple of weeks and then end up being standard operating modes for a long time. So to conclude, basically, the strategic response to COVID-19, what I would encourage people to be aware of is that there's no one solution, but keep aware and of some of the recommendations that were mentioned earlier, and applying the type of disciplines that have been used by everyone in normal circumstances. Let's not be distracted by the crisis, by having to deal with emergencies and hurried new workload and increased workload, and stick to good practices. So culture and awareness is extremely important in normal cases. In this case, in the current environment, it's even more important because people are not even in the common mode of working. So they're not in the office with the sort of second nature mode that they are in an environment which is protected and where certain activities take place. No, people are switching every 5 minutes, so to speak, from an office mode to a more casual home mode, and the line tends to blur. So raising awareness, being very focused, and some guidance. In an earlier webcast, one of the previous webcasts of PwC, we focused on good handling and good practices in remote working, and this applies both to healthy and good ways of working, so that you don't blur the lines between work and home and leisure, as well as the good measures to put in to protect confidentiality, privacy, as well as security. The detective and protective controls. Yes, probably many organizations have these in place. More importantly is monitoring of alerts, detections that are happening. As Kirsten was saying earlier, we now have endpoints which are outside the strong periphery of the organization. They are connected to either public or home devices, home internet connections. So it's a different environment. So we need to use the investment that we have put in detective and protective controls, monitor them more rigorously, investigate incidents or suspicious activity, and act quickly. The usual data security and patching was mentioned is extremely important. With the heightened threats around, new vulnerabilities are being detected and need to be patched with little delay, because there is much more time in the hands of these malicious attackers than previously. So essentially, keep in mind that on top of your normal day routine, you have to deal with the pressures brought about by this COVID-19 situation. And even on top of that, we need to add more attention to the defenses that we've put in place and look into them. Essentially, the message really is to apply what we have all learned in the past, I guess, to apply good practices, think of people, technology, and processes, not just technology, but also, most importantly, is keep doing the right thing. So keep patching, give good training, give guidance to people who have not been familiar with working in a particular way before. It may not be intuitive to everyone, so take the trouble to to prepare people to apply the right defense mechanisms. So keep up the good work. Essentially, do not adopt bad habits because we're in a crisis, no matter how tempting it is. So we're talking about introducing freeware to do video conferencing, file sharing, and so many other collaborative necessities that we have to put in. Yes, it's tempting, particularly in this cost-cutting environment that we need to apply, but the consequences could be very expensive, so beware. Likewise, hasty implementations. We all know what haste brings. Even if we need to roll out something much faster than we would normally do, make sure that we don't leave it as it is out of the box. We need to catch up and make sure, even retrospectively, that the correct cybersecurity defenses have been put in. Be aware that many of staff may be using non-corporate devices, perhaps a home computer, perhaps a laptop that was bought, begged or borrowed in a quick rush, and not configured perhaps as robustly as in normal times. So beware of that. And most important, increase caution. So in an environment like this, I think we've given quite enough messages to raise a bit more awareness, and hopefully this has highlighted the need to be more cautious than normal, if that's possible. So do your testing, do not cut corners with testing, even when releasing a new app or a changing configuration, an update to a firewall, and so on. Testing is extremely important. I already mentioned monitoring. We've put in the sensors and the alerts, so let's use them in these cases. And penetration testing in the context that we've put a lot of facilities online, cloud, web-based solutions, perhaps released quickly, new, let's say, web solutions to reach out to our customers, to our suppliers, and so on. Obviously, we rushed these to get them up and running quickly so that we could serve and we can continue doing business. Be aware that these may have been done in a bit of haste, and the testing and the rigor may not have been as usual. Okay, take the opportunity now, even though the tools have been deployed, to go back and see that they are well defended, well configured. So do pen tests, do vulnerability assessments, go back and look at the changes that were done, check the firewall rules, and so on. So it's really applying more diligence, more caution, and using the investments that we've put in security in the past to good effect. Okay, so basically that is the end of the presentation slides that we had and the messages that we needed to put through. We have some more time for those of you who are still available and do have the time to take any questions that you may have or discuss any point or make any comments that you feel we can share with the audience. I'm not sure we have any questions that have come through during the presentations. Okay, we have a comment. Yeah, we have a question. So how can we effectively communicate cyber awareness policies in a work from home scenario? For example, an organization cannot enforce Wi-Fi security on a home router used by an employee. How can we tackle such a situation? Yeah, good question. Thank you. Basically, if I can answer myself, starting from the end, yes, we can't really, ensure that home Wi-Fi security is corporate grade security. In fact, we need to assume that the Wi-Fi in the home is insecure. You need to treat the environment of the home of the employee as though it is a public connection. So as John and Kirsten were explaining, very importantly, ensure that connections are via VPN, logins are using two-factor authentication or multi-factor, make sure that any web or cloud services are using secure sockets, HTTPS rather than port 80. So we need to assume that a home user is in an environment which is insecure. This applies not only to the web and laptop or computer connectivity or device connectivity, because it may be a mobile or a tablet, but also, as was explained, other materials, so documents and other information, phone calls. Do not assume that a phone call is being done in a secure, confidential environment. It may be being held in an environment which is not secure. The other part of the question is, how can we effectively communicate? Yes, I think the point was made in the last couple of slides. Keep it simple. In these days, and particularly when you can't communicate face-to-face or in a small group or in a classroom environment where you can manage attention, it's very important to keep things simple. Be precise, be specific, don't give all the options, give instructions, give orders if necessary. This is the easier way of getting the message through. So do not do this, do not do this, do this. You know, that sort of ideal communication. And reminders often, perhaps updates, do not overload, because that is counterproductive. I hope I've answered that question. Anyone wants to add any comments or add?
If I may add something to that question. John, one particular slide, he mentioned the difference between split VPN and a full-blown VPN tunnel. So if you are concerned with that your employees are accessing company data, possibly from insecure networks, perhaps from their home or public access, of course, you would enforce that corporate resources are only accessible via VPN. And even those services that are over the cloud, you can make specific configurations to route to only accept traffic that is routed through the office network. And to make that happen, you would need to configure a full-blown VPN. And basically, that means that when a user connects with his VPN client, any traffic destined to the internet will still be routed over the VPN tunnel across the organization's network and then to the internet. Of course, you're adding overhead, you're adding a bit of maybe delay even for the end user, depending on the connection. But of course, you're ensuring security first and foremost. So that could be a consideration to make. Just an extra pointer for you.
Thanks, Chris.
I think we have another question.
Yes, we have another question. How can you limit shadow IT given the current situation? Yeah, good point. I can start by saying that shadow IT is always present, and it doesn't have to be when we are in this current situation. And it is a challenge. It's a cat and mouse game, essentially. And we must always be aware of it and trying to combat it. Now, there are a lot of tools to try to detect, some also to prevent. But of course, the prevention tends to be get in the way, if you like, of the user experience and is not often tolerated or accepted. But certainly detection tools to identify, for example, software being implemented. Let's take the example of Zoom. You can easily run scripts or use tools to identify who has or whether people have installed the Zoom executable, the actual program, downloaded and installed it on their device. Perhaps you should prevent or, if detected, to remove that. At least if you are using certain tools, perhaps imposed by a third party, then use the safest way of working, that is using the browser. It's also possible to detect add-ons that have been installed in browsers. These tend to be also sources of risk that need to be detected and addressed. So detection, prevention, policies enforced on corporate devices, more and more as we're using services which are hosted in the cloud and web-based services, the dependence on installing applications locally on devices decreases, so it's becoming more and more feasible to limit and to control what gets installed on devices. The counterpart is that more and more people are using their own devices, whether it is a smartphone, a tablet, or other portable devices, and these may not be completely in control of the organization. We may not have as wide control as we can have. Some are practicing bring your own device, so we don't have even the right to lock down as much as the organization would like on these devices. But certainly we need to apply the assumption that there is risk, that we cannot assume that all users are doing what they're supposed to do and not doing what they're not supposed to do. It's a case of, as I said, cat and mouse, which we need to keep the game up. We cannot relax, whether it's at times like this pandemic or on a normal day. It still happens on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Guys, anything to add?
If I may add to your points, George. Yes, shadow IT, I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, if we remove the situation from the equation and go back to our, say, normal organization network, shadow IT is already a problem. And within the network, the organization's network, you can tackle that through technology like monitoring your firewall. I mean, today's next-gen firewalls can easily tell you which they are app aware, so they will tell you which apps are being accessed through your network. Of course, there are the endpoint solutions that can be deployed, and that will reveal and will let you know which apps are being accessed. Of course, that's an investment to consider. But currently, in this scenario, it's only an endpoint solution which would let you know the shadow IT apps being used, because of course your company machines are not sitting within your network. Of course, the other method, if I can call it that, is to actually speak and discuss within your organization. I mean, from experience, you know, you're meeting another team, another head of a department, and during his conversation, he would perhaps disclose that they're using, I don't know, I'm inventing, like Skype, when Skype is not an official communication app within your company, but he's using Skype or Slack or the million other tools there are for internal team communication. And even by that small remark he makes, you already start identifying these gaps that you have. Of course, then comes the tackling it, which is more challenging, because you have to help them understand the risk. And very importantly, you also need to ensure that you have an alternative, because a mistake perhaps security professionals or IT administrators usually do is they try to take some tool away from the user group without offering a suitable alternative. Sometimes shadow IT, or most of the times, it sort of it arises because of a lack of adequate tool. You know, there's a need for a specific tool set or features which the company approved app does not have. And instead of speaking up, because perhaps there's a bureaucracy in the process of getting things approved, so on and so forth, they will just simply install apps and register with perhaps different email accounts and start working. So that's where the problem lies. That's the root cause, I would say. So it's always important that before you consider taking something away, you are prepared to give an alternative, a suitable alternative. So there needs to be a discussion with whoever is using these tools. Do we have any more questions?
Okay, last chance. There doesn't seem to be any more questions. Okay, everyone, now's the time. If there's anything you'd like to mention, as I said, in the meantime, the session is recorded and we'll send you a link at the end of it. On the screen, you're seeing 3 members of the cybersecurity advisory team at PwC with our contact details. You'll be able to see this from the email as well that we'll send out after this session. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or would like to have a chat or discuss any particular aspect. Okay, if there are no further questions, as is the habit now, I'd like to say thanks to the rest of the speakers. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe, but more importantly, stay secure from a cybersecurity point of view. Okay, thanks again, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.